And thanks for joining us on another new week of all things people, power, and politics. And we are off to a busy start already. This, my friends, is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. We hope you were able to relax this holiday weekend. But even if you took a break from the news cycle, it didn't take a break at all. But we got you. So toss that phone aside, buckle up. We have a lot of ground to cover. The DOJ walks back a claim that accused sexual predator Jeffrey Epstein kept a client list. But there's one part of the new information that's raising even more questions. We'll walk you through some jailhouse video in just a moment here. And Elon Musk adds a new chapter to his feud with President Donald Trump over the big, beautiful bill. He's launching a pretty big fight, his own political party. How the president is responding tonight, and we are debating if there's any chance of success for what's known as America Party with Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and conservative columnist Brandon Bryce. Tariffs are where we begin, though, tonight because President Donald Trump put 25% import taxes on Japan and South Korea. Those will take effect August 1st. The president announced the taxes on all imports from the two countries on his Truth Social page. He warned both sides not to put retaliatory tariffs on the United States. Now, stay with me here on this second part. The deadline for other countries to come to the table and make new deals is Wednesday. But here's the thing. The U.S. is warning those higher taxes could kick in August 1st. They left wiggle room, saying they'd possibly consider some kind of an adjustment. The Trump administration says it is trying to balance things out, while Democrats say this is nothing but economic chaos.
Weeks ago, I stood at this podium and I told all of you that the president was going to create tailor-made trade plans for each and every country on this planet, and that's what this administration continues to be focused on.
This is a trade war that our businesses are paying a heavy price for in uncertainty and not knowing what will happen next. And consumers, instead of seeing the drastic reduction in prices that Trump promised us in January, we're seeing prices go up in one area after another.
I know it changes every day, but this isn't the color you want to see on the big board as we take a look at how stocks finished today. The Dow down 422 points, the NASDAQ down 188, and the S&P down 49, as we see right here. As we always say, this show is all about you, so we're taking your questions to an expert. You know her well. Former auto supply chain executive Jan Griffiths is in Studio C to talk about how these taxes could have an impact on us here at home. That's coming up in just about 20 minutes. But now turning to the Israel-Hamas war, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met President Donald Trump at the White House for a third time this year over dinner. The Prime Minister earlier met with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Secretary of State Marco Rubio before that dinner with the president. Trump has said he wants the war in Gaza to end soon, something he made clear after the 12-day war between Israel and Hamas. That's something White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reiterated today.
The utmost priority for the president right now in the Middle East is to end the war in Gaza and to return all of the hostages. Also, as you know, there was a ceasefire proposal that Israel supports that was sent to Hamas, and we hope that they will agree to this proposal. We want to see all of the hostages released. That's on the top of the president's mind.
And a little correction here, obviously a very important one. When I talked about that 12-day war, it was between Israel and Iran. So many people have questions about what's next, including Benjamin Netanyahu himself. He plans to meet with House Speaker Mike Johnson on Tuesday. White House officials are urging Israel and Hamas to agree to a new ceasefire, which could last for 60 days. By the way, that's just scratching the surface of today's news. So let's pick up the pace and run through some of the other big stories making news at this hour. We begin with the horrific floods in Texas. At least 80 people, including more than 24 girls and counselors at a summer camp, are dead. The tragedy started a debate about if cuts at the National Weather Service through DOGE hampered warning efforts. Some Democrats argue it did. But as you know on this program, we always look at the facts on this show, and it's important to note. Now, here's what we know. The National Weather Service was asked if they were short. Did you have what you needed? How many people did you have? Here's what we know. 5 staffers were on duty as the storm formed, which is, by the way, the usual number when severe weather is expected. They also issued urgent flash flood warnings before the river rose. A retired meteorologist at the agency says there's always a challenge of pinpointing what they call extreme values. But the fact there was a catastrophic warning issued highlighted the urgency. The federal government says it will try to deport this man if he's released before standing trial on human smuggling charges. You'll remember Kilmar Abrego Garcia was mistakenly deported earlier this year, something the Trump administration administration admits was an administrative error, but claims Abrego Garcia is a gang member. His lawyers say there's no evidence of that. A DOJ attorney says ICE would detain him once he's released and send him to a country that's not his native El Salvador, but didn't know which nation that would end up being. His own attorneys have requested he remain behind bars. And in a new chapter in the feud between President Donald Trump and Elon Musk, the two have been at odds over President Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which Musk says undercuts his Department of Government Efficiency's efforts to rein in federal spending. Well, now Musk says he's forming a new political party called the America Party. President Trump has his own ideas about what Musk thinks. Let's take you back to February now. Remember when the DOJ released files related to financier and accused sex predator Jeffrey Epstein? Well, there were no bombshells in those files. Well, in the months ahead, the Trump administration promised more files would be released, with Pam Bondi saying the FBI was reviewing tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children. She also made this claim on Fox News.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients? Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that. I'm reviewing JFK files, MLK files. That's all in the process of being reviewed because that was done at the directive of the president from all of these agencies.
So have you seen anything that you said, oh my gosh?
Not yet.
Well, fast forward to today, the DOJ is walking that back. They say there's no evidence a client list existed. And on top of that, despite their promises, no more files will be released. This walks back a popular conspiracy theory that Epstein maintained a client list. The DOJ released surveillance video to back up its finding that Epstein took his own life. That video only covers the area outside his cell, not inside. The 11-hour video shows no one coming in or leaving Epstein's cell. But we should point out part of that video is only prompting more questions. I want to show you the video the DOJ says was taken outside of Epstein's cell. We recorded this directly off the department's website. I want you to really watch carefully that timestamp at the bottom. You'll notice that the time jumps from 11:58 right here, right to midnight. So there's a minute of video that apparently is unaccounted for or lost. You'll see it once again right over here. Boom. This is unedited. The Hill reportedly reached out to the DOJ to figure out what happened with the timestamp shift, and they haven't heard back yet. The DOJ says further disclosures of the Epstein files would not be appropriate or warranted, but that 1 minute leaves a lot of questions. Up next, the budget battle is over, but questions about the fallout are just now beginning. How are Democrats responding? And will the big, beautiful bill help or hurt Republicans in the midterms? We're debating all of that and more with Congresswoman Debbie Dingell in Studio C and conservative columnist Brandon Bryce. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Joining us now to talk about President Trump's spending bill, which still reverberates through, of course, Washington and Michigan. Also, Elon Musk's new political party, that idea, and more. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell here in Studio C, and live via Zoom, conservative columnist and host of the Bryce is Right podcast, Brandon Bryce. Brandon, thanks for joining us via Zoom. And Congresswoman, always good to see you here in studio. We have a lot to talk about. Let's begin here with this bill. Look, I've been actually told by some Democrats, stop calling it big and beautiful. Just call it the budget bill. Call it what you want.
I call it the big bad bill.
You called it the big bad bill. Brandon, perhaps you'd call it something else. But listen, there's two Republicans in the House who are your colleagues. And you are known to work across the aisle and work with Republicans all the time. These are two friends of yours. Thomas Massie, a Republican out of Kentucky, and Brian Fitzpatrick out of Pennsylvania. Both Republicans who voted against this bill. Bad idea for their political futures or good?
Tom Massie, they both voted for this bill for different reasons. Tom Massie is someone who is known for voting that what he believes. He will not be intimidated by anybody. The president, I think, finds him to be the biggest pain in the blank in the Congress and has threatened to try to defeat him in the primary. He did not want to add to this deficit. And by the way, all these members of the Freedom Caucus that don't want the deficit to grow, $3 trillion added to this bill, $4 trillion, but $3 just to give tax breaks to the billionaires. Brian Fitzpatrick is a wonderful, moderate Republican from Pennsylvania who has a heart and compassion and knows how many people it's going to hurt in Pennsylvania. They're going to be kicked off Medicaid. The children, the seniors, those with disabilities, the veterans are going to be hungry because of what's in this bill.
Brian Fitzpatrick actually was quoted as saying it's just simply not good for my constituents. I know Mr. Massey was also concerned about that debt that you spoke of, $3.3 trillion. Brandon, Bryce, I got to ask you the question. You heard Congresswoman Dingell say moderate Republicans, and some people may say, who? Who's that? Is there a party outside of MAGA Republicans that's willing to take a risk like these two men and vote against something that President Trump is voting for?
You know, there's always people who are going to have issues with the bill. But I said this yesterday. I called this, Roop. I said the bill was going to pass. And I can tell you, the reality is no one wants to get in front of the president behind this bill because of the repercussions. And let's be very clear. You know, these two are outliers, but in many cases, people want to be reelected. They want their seats back. And they looked at this. And this is the challenge we have in politics, where you have those people who are voting their conscience versus those people who want to be reelected. And as you saw, people chose to be reelected. That's the reality of where we are. Is it the best bill? Absolutely not. But it is a bill that now begins to look at fraud and waste and be responsible. The challenge is that, and again, no one's talking about the funding going towards the military, but it's the increase that is causing many Republicans to have concerns. And also, as I said before, it's those areas in the South, in urban areas, it's Medicaid. These are the issues that now those Republicans, not the president, have to go back to their constituencies and explain.
Well, Brandon, my other question is about fiscal responsibility, because for all the years that I've been covering politics, in maybe 3 decades, I've never met or seen a president who's a Republican who doesn't tout why fiscal responsibility is so darn important. They blame the Democrats for spending too much money and increasing the debt, yet this bill increases it $3.3 trillion. How can you hold those two truths together as a conservative?
Well, first of all, this is a different kind of Republican. You've never seen a Republican president that was a former TV reality show, and he got voted in by a large margin. So we are not living in normal times. Again, could this bill have been much better? Absolutely. I wouldn't even call it big and beautiful. I would just call it the budget bill. The challenge is that now, again, the bill passed, and now those Republicans have to explain why they chose to support the bill that is actually a tax increase and not a tax decrease. Could there have been other measures? Absolutely. But the reality is this is the difference between, again, Democrats and Republicans. The Republicans have chose to support and get behind the president. We can't say the same thing about Mr. Biden. And in some cases, his own party has had challenge with him. And as you can see, he didn't get reelected.
Well, Brandon, Congresswoman Dingell, as just someone who's not a politician, who watches this from afar and is a student of journalism and someone who cares deeply about this country, I don't want my congresspeople to just get behind someone because of party affiliation. I want a congressperson who can think discriminatively about things. Have we lost that? And is this two-party system, is what Elon Musk talking about right now, a viable idea to say maybe Democrats and Republicans, it just isn't working out?
So let me say this. First of all, you're seeing it play out in Michigan. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Mike Duggan is running as an independent, and he is a viable candidate. So start there. I'm somebody who says what she thinks, and I get in trouble. And that's where I'm going to be. I feel about this bill the way Bryce does in many ways. Many Republicans had very, very difficult choices. Some of them are in the state of Michigan, like Tom Barrett. Okay, who's the worst enemy? The people that he represents, because he's going to have a very tough general election, or does he face a primary opponent because of what the president's going to do, and what kind of wrath is he going to face? I can't tell you how many Republicans came up to me, doctors, several of the doctors, and said, this bill is going to hurt hospitals. It's going to hurt people. You need to be, people have to be able to vote their conscience. It's getting worse and worse.
Are people voting that? Because clearly they're not,
everybody
right?
is. Tom Massey, I don't agree with him on probably
a million things.
98, a million things, probably agree on a few things, but a very few. But he always votes his conscience. Always. And that's what the people of Kentucky
Well, that's what your late husband John Dingell did. He was friends with.
John Dingell was always in trouble.
Well, John Dingell was in trouble. John McCain was in trouble posthumously through this president who.
Both of them, by the way.
Yes, I mean Mr. Trump, but the president was firing at them long after they were gone about their records, about cooperating with other people. My question is this: does Elon Musk have some kind of a good idea here to say maybe we should have another party?
I think that it's a very complicated time. We are a two-party system right now in our democracy. And, just for the record, I am a Democrat and proud of it. We got to work on a lot of things. But before I married my husband, I was a Republican. And it's very hard to be married to John Dingell, but I was a moderate Republican and a Dingell Democrat. And quite frankly, Bill Milliken, who was Republican in this state, was more liberal than John Dingell was on some issues. I think people should vote for the person that they think will be the best candidate for the job, though I happen to think that Democrats are, for the most part, the right candidates. But it's very hard to start a third party. We'll see. Mike Duggan, this election in Michigan is going to have consequences in many different ways.
It sets a precedent.
And if
it really does.
Is a successful, which I'm just going to say that you're going to see, I think, more people not wishing to identify with either party because they're frustrated at both parties.
Brendan, Bryce, we know that Mayor Duggan has billboards out on the way to Mackinac right during the policy conference saying, sick of the red, tired of the blue, vote independence. And you asked the question about Elon Musk to you, Brandon. I'm curious to know your answer. Does he have some credence in this idea of another party?
No shot. I think Duggan unfortunately shot himself, politically by not sticking to being a Democrat. He was a Democrat of the most populous city in Michigan, and I think by far he would have been the front runner. I didn't see a reason why he would abandon his party and now give Jocelyn Benson an opportunity. But let me go back real quick. First of all, I want to thank the Congresswoman for, once a Republican, always a Republican, and we always want you back, Madam Congresswoman. We love to have you.
Not this party, not this president.
I think it's an awful idea to start a third party. We know that more than 44% of independents in the nation, or voters, identify as being independent.
Sure.
But the Democratic Party and the Republican Party should always be an American party. And the minute that we lose those values, it becomes something else. And quite frankly, I think it's a distraction to both parties to even have a conversation. Get the two-party systems working together. You talked about earlier John McCain, Carl Inspector, and John Dingell. Those guys had their own views, but at the end of the day, they could break bread and sit down and talk rational.
Yeah,
right
and
now,
so could Bill Clinton. So could Bill Clinton, and so could George Senior Bush, and so could many other people. And it's still happening. We have people like Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and many Republicans out there who still do the same thing, including, by the way, Steve Scalise, who sits down and tries to come up with things with other people. You know what? We're out of time for this segment. But Brandon, I hope you'll join us again. Always good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, great to see you as well.
Good to be with you, Brandon. Take care.
Tariffs for being with us, both of you. We're talking tariffs after the break. Former auto supply chain executive Jan Griffiths is in Studio C taking your questions next on The Pulse. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This is The Pulse. Joining us now to talk about tariffs and their impact on the auto industry, former auto supply chain executive and host of the Automotive Leaders podcast, Jan Griffiths. And Jan, it's always good to see you. Thanks for joining us here.
My pleasure.
We have a couple of viewers that have some comments and questions, but let's begin with what this means when you hear about things like South Korea and Japan having a 25% tariff slapped on them by August, a deadline to make a deal by Wednesday for other countries out there. What does this mean to you? How consequential is it?
Well, it's significant because the deadline has moved. It has now moved to August the 1st. Originally, right after Liberation Day, the tariffs were going to come into effect almost immediately, and then we had the 90-day pause, and we had the conversation around 90 deals in 90 days. To be clear, at this point in time, there are no deals. There are frameworks. That's very different.
People have come to the table to have conversations, but nothing's been signed yet.
Exactly. There are frameworks, and that's very different to having a deal where every single detail is laid out. Now, it's good progress, but there's a long way to go. And you're looking at over 90 countries that we have to get to. Scott Bessent reported on Sunday that he wants to focus on 18 because 18 of those countries represent 95% of the deficit, which makes sense.
Sure.
Focus on the smaller amount.
You know, we've been talking for a long time now about, all right, go out and run. If you need to buy a dishwasher, go get it. You need to buy an appliance from out of this country, go get it. And cars, you know, if you need to buy a new car, do it while we still have inventory. What does this do to change things in terms of that August deadline?
We're still going to see the tariff impact come through. Now, it's a little slower than we all expected, but the OEMs and the dealers are still working off of inventory. And then they're being very careful and selective as to how they increase prices and on which models.
Which is really important.
Yes.
We have some viewers who are chiming in. We always say the show is about you, and so you have questions. We want to answer them. We'll begin with Amy. Amy, thanks for writing in on the Pulse here tonight. You're asking whether this means that our region could stand to invest more in public transportation and non-car alternatives or diversify our economy for that matter. Amy is concerned about our eggs being in that one basket, something we talked about a lot during the bankruptcies of GM and at the time Chrysler.
Yeah. What I love about this question is it challenges your idea of mobility. Mm-hmm. So instead of thinking, okay, it's all about buying a car, that's not what it's about. It's what is this thing, mobility? How do we get from place to place? And it doesn't mean you have to buy a car. You can use public transportation. There are other ways to get from A to B. And in fact, Governor Whitmer earlier this year in a proposal, released a proposal that included $250 million for public transit. So I think this question is great because it makes us think more about mobility. And do we really need to buy a car? Are there other ways to get around?
But it's also our lifeline, and it is what we do here in the Motor City. And it's critically, I mean, the reason that, you know, my whole family is in Michigan is because my dad worked for General Motors, and that's so critically important. So there are so many people watching going, wait a minute here, we don't need public transit. I mean, arguably, the reason that there wasn't public transit in our area in the first place is because there was so much pressure from the big three years and decades ago not to do it, right?
Yeah, we need both. We need to have that right mix. Some people cannot physically drive a vehicle.
Sure.
Some people cannot afford to drive a vehicle. So there needs to be options so we can improve mobility for all of our residents. So the car is not going away, but we need to have options.
And options are important, something that, as you say, even the governor is talking about, hey, maybe we should do so we can have options out there. Jennifer, thanks for asking us a question here on the Pulse. Your comment ended up becoming somewhat of a conversation piece here. So, Jennifer, you're saying buy America, made in America, no tariffs. And Jennifer, thank you for that comment. Jennifer Hood is the one who wrote that to us. And she's basically saying, if you buy American, we don't have to worry about the tariffs, but that's not always the case, right?
There is no such thing as an American vehicle. And I know some people are probably just gasping right now going, what? What do you mean there's no such thing as an American vehicle? There are vehicles that are built, assembled in America, yes. But the supply chain, so all the components that are required to build that vehicle, a large percentage of them come from other countries. In fact, I met somebody in a coffee shop just the other day, and he was so proud of himself. I'm going to buy an American vehicle. I'm going to buy a GM. I'm going to buy a Buick Envision. And he was so proud of his decision. And I hated to burst his bubble. That's made in China.
But it's made in China. The Envision is made in China.
Yes.
And even if most of the parts are here, perhaps that can help impact the cost of the car. You got to make sure that you're looking at an entirely American-made car, you're saying, which doesn't exist because pieces and parts come from other places.
Exactly.
Well, this is one that impacts all of us. And Jan, we always thank you for joining us to help unpack it on the show. Thanks for joining us on the Pulse tonight.
My pleasure.
Well, that is the Pulse for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, it was great to be with you. We'll see you next time.